Hi, I'm Steve. Welcome back to Ess-Fo. A couple things came up recently I want to talk about as far as this ongoing debate over what is borrowing from the musical canon, what is stealing, what is just musicians doing what musicians do. Kind of like, comedians go through this a lot too. What's stealing a joke and what is being inspired or, keeping the conversation going. Two things that came up recently were this Jojo Siwa, who I'd never heard of, thank God, and her song Iced Coffee, which I listen to hundreds of songs every week. I'll often just throw all of whatever's on the Spotify new release radar into a playlist and go through it. And I was stunned. I actually sat up when it started playing, which if you haven't heard it, it's stunning. If you're, I guess you'd have to be aware of Sabrina Carpenter's pretty inescapable hit, which even in articles regarding her and Jojo Siwa still say espresso, like they spell out espresso, which just makes me sad. Anyway, if you hear espresso and then you hear iced coffee, I sat up. I'm not a huge Sabrina Carpenter fan. She's enjoyable, but I was like, whoa, that took some balls. And now Siwa, who I didn't know was a child star, was on one of these Dance Mom shows, I think, and has since been recording music. She's allegedly a very eccentric figure. She was actually parodied in an SNL Weekend Update sketch about 7 months ago. So she's not only a child actor from the past, but she's got, people know who she is, and she's current enough to be used in a modern news joke setting. Anyway, she alleges that she actually wrote the song some 2 years ago and just never released it. And regardless, though, she didn't release it until after Espresso became a big hit. And so she was very clearly piggybacking on it. And just, it's got a sort of, Dua Lipa-ish light funk groove. And, one song is titled about one coffee drink and the other one is about another. My daughter, who's in high school, told me that there's, an online TikTok plot to, yes, use or listen to or watch Jojo Siwa's video on TikTok or something other, but just don't like it. Don't click the like button so she gets the views without the likes. Seems pretty petty, but that's the world. And I bring so that was one thing that happened in the past couple of weeks, and then also in late October or early November, Elvis Costello sat with the magazine Vanity Fair for an article, and for some reason the interviewer asked Mr. Costello about the long simmering frustration among Costello fans that Olivia Rodrigo has a hit, Brutal, that sounds very much like Pump It Up, at least the beginning of it. And so the interviewer asks him, are you still not going to sue her over this? What kind of fucking question is that? And Costello replies, no, I believe music is an ongoing conversation. He says Pump It Up itself was directly inspired by Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. And so it brings up these points. We get very emotionally attached sometimes to songs, even if it's not a song you like. If you find out an artist you don't like may have lifted parts of someone else's song, or there's a lot of very coincidental things that overlap between two different songs, you kind of like, yeah, fuck them. They bring them down, sue them. And I'm very sure that if I was who I was when I was 16 today, I'd be like, yeah, Elvis, sue Olivia, poser, The two situations, the Siwa, Carpenter, Costello, Rodrigo, are fundamentally different ideas of copyright and plagiarizing and identity fraud or something. I don't know what you want to call it. But, they both have the potential to trigger these very visceral emotions in us. How deeply personal we are affected by these things. Like, I don't know, I can't, I'm trying to think if there's a song controversy where I wasn't like very staunchly on one side or the other. I was never in the middle. Like, I don't think George Harrison, My Sweet Lord, I've never heard the connection between those two songs. Whereas there's others where I'm astonished they didn't, like Vanilla Ice and Ice Ice Baby and Queen. Like, did Queen just never follow through with that lawsuit? How was that? How did he get away with that? If you ever watched the videos of how Ice Ice or how Vanilla Ice explained it back from the early '90s, it's a laugh.
We sampled them from him, but it's not the same bass line. Like it goes ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding ding ding. That's the way theirs goes. Ours goes ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding 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 diggy ding.
The law is you can't copyright a chord progression. I believe this is the law, but you can copyright melodies. And so in that case, the bass melody was a note different, I suppose. Maybe that was the difference. It's also a relatively modern issue. And by the way, let me know how you guys feel about this in the comments, if there's anybody who has an opinion on this. 100 plus years ago, when popular music was starting to become a thing, what happened was a songwriter, let's say Scott Joplin, would write something like "Oh Susanna," and it would be published in books, and these books would be sent out across the country and sold in general stores and bookstores and department stores, and what have you. And after a song had some success, competing songwriters would flood the market with copycat songs, more or less. If you had a song about a boat, the guy would start writing boat songs, and you'd have songs about cowboys, Jewish cowboys, and you'd have more songs about Jewish cowboys. It was chaos. That was the competition back then. This was back in a time where, just as recorded music was starting to become a thing, but was still on those heavy cylinders, and it wasn't really widely disseminated. Whereas people would buy the sheet music from stores, and back then, if you didn't music to be heard, either you had to play it yourself or you had to go somewhere it was being played. And a lot of people played at home. They had instruments at home. And so that's what the music industry was at that point. It was disseminating songs and building a songwriter's reputation. And then once the public started focusing in on particular singers as opposed to particular songs, plagiarism accusations sort of modified. I mean, you had bands like the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin being accused of plagiarizing blues artists or putting their own names on songs that were effectively in the public domain. You have, then there was another tweak in the mid-'80s. Ford Motor Company, or an advertising firm working for Ford Motor Company, was doing a series of ad campaigns aimed at yuppies. And each of the campaign was supposed to throw yuppies back to when they were learning to drive the car, songs that were on the radio when they were growing up, and they were getting the original artists to re-record some of these hits. They approached Bette Midler, or Bette Midler's manager, to re-record a song that they wanted to use, and the management flat out said, no, we're not going to do this. We don't do commercials. This was back when artists didn't do commercials because it was deemed inferior to them. And anyway, the advertising firm said, okay, fine. So they hired one of Bette Midler's backup singers from her tour and told her to sing the song they had, I can't remember what song it was, exactly like Beth would do it, including all her vocal manners and tics. Midler sued the advertising firm and Ford for using her vocal likeness, which was then, sort of a way of stealing her marketability, her image, as opposed to stealing a song that she didn't own the copyright to. I can't remember exactly how that panned out. I remember one of the court cases where they threw it out against Ford, saying Ford wasn't liable for this, but be that as it may, that became an important part of case law. That and it later echoed into when Pharrell and Robin Thicke were sued by the Marvin Gaye estate over Blurred Lines, which doesn't borrow from any Marvin Gaye song in particular, but sort of the aesthetic of some of his songs, the percussion and the feel, and they were successfully sued over that. And You can understand Marvin Gaye's estate wanting to protect his legacy, but you wonder if Marvin would have sued this himself. It's one of those things. You go into the 80s and all the issues that crop up with hip-hop and sampling. Hip-hop started as an MC being hired to sing over breaks during DJ sets and discos. It was very naturally done over pre-existingly recorded music. And so hip-hop just brought that out, and then when it came to have to be recorded and sold, then the problems arose. And I think sampling was there was a cutoff. There was an amnesty for older songs that used samples, but then after 1990 or something, you had to get permission, or at least pay out credits for songwriters. And, I guess performers too, right? You got mashups, you got mixtapes. Mixtapes are still only hawked for free on certain websites because they can't be sold because of the copyright issues involved in them. But I guess the reason I wanted to talk about this was back to Costello himself saying that, it's the history of music making that everything borrows from each other, and that's how we push the art forward. So the question becomes, what responsibility should we feel, not just as artists and record companies and agents and lawyers, but as fans, to sort of cut people a break and let the conversation breathe? I know nobody wants to see someone make money on the back of someone else's hard work. That's not what I'm getting at. But I do kind of agree with Mr. Costello in that we should take our foot off a little bit and let people explain and have the conversation, right? As we strain to create and individualize and cut new paths, are we breaking the collective spirit? Are we trying to pull away from the pack when in the past we used to try to use music as a gathering thing? Like I said before, if you wanted to hear music 120 years ago, you had to play it yourself, or you had to go somewhere to hear it. You had to be with other people, and that was part of the whole folk spirit. Even before we called folk music, it was just a communal part of living. And now it's more a divisive thing, it seems like it can be when it comes down to these issues. And I think something is lost in that.